Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with tests school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is, what does public education owe to advanced students? But first, let's meet our special guest, Kenneth Shores.
Dr. Kenneth Shores, an associate professor specializing in education policy in the School of Education at the University of Delaware. His research is focused on educational inequality and encompasses both descriptive and causal inference, addressing racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in test scores, school disciplinary policy, classification systems, and school resources. In addition, he has examined how improvements to school finance systems can reduce educational inequality and how vulnerabilities in school finance systems can contribute to it. Dr. Shores was a National Academy of Education Spencer Dissertation Fellow, a Philanthropy and Civic Society Fellow, a Stanford Graduate Fellow, and an Institute of Education Sciences Predoctoral Fellow. In 2018, he was the co-recipient of the National Council on Measurement and Education's annual award for exceptional achievement in educational measurement. He received his PhD in education policy analysis from Stanford University. Prior to graduate school, he was a middle school teacher on the Navajo Nation. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate being here.
Kenneth, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to speaking with you about a topic that does not get enough attention. But before we dive into talking about public schools and thriving students, I'd love to talk a bit about your own background. You've got a long history in education, and I'm really curious as to your path and how you settled on educational policy as your focus.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was, as Amy said, I was a middle school teacher on the Navajo Nation for half a decade. And I liked being in the classroom, but I started having interests that were kind of broader than my own classroom. I had questions about, how we design curriculum and how do we decide about what kinds of policies are going to be implemented that are shaping how kids learn. And so that's why I pursued my PhD and ultimately got it at Stanford University. And so at Stanford, my PhD advisors were an economist who kind of looked at educational finance and teacher labor markets. And my other advisor was a sociologist who looked at segregation patterns and inequality. And my research has kind of blended those two things. That's kind of what I do now, is I look at how the structural factors of schools can impede or create opportunities for kids and how policies also shape those things.
So you wrote a really interesting article, Rethinking What Public Education Owes to Flourishing Children. And I was so struck by it. Even the question of what public education owes anyone. So I want to kind of unpack some of the ideas that you shared and start with this concept of public education, right?
Sure.
In theory, what is the purpose of public education?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, there is not a single answer for that. I think people have
No
different
definitive
ideas.
answer.
But you might have a model, right?
I have a model, yes. And what I try to do in this article is introduce, I think, a new model, or at least one that's not discussed very often. So I think, one model that people have is it's good for the economy. You want to have a thing that educates all kids so that they get a certain set of skills, and then they can go into the labor market, and your country can get richer. And that's kind of the economic justification for it. I think that's a good justification. There's another justification, which is that education is a social justice institution, that its primary function is to create equality of opportunity because kids have different starting points. Because they have different starting points, the school should try to remediate that as best it can. So that's another view. I think that also has an important place in school. What I am interested in, though, is thinking about what is it owing to everybody else. So some kids are not necessarily going to go and be Bill Gates and innovate, and they might be surfers, but they're still in school for thousands and thousands of hours of their lifetime. And what are they going to get out of that experience? And if they are advanced in school, what specifically are they going to get out of school? And so I think the other thing that I'm trying to introduce in this article is this idea that what schools should do is try to make an environment where every kid is getting something out of it from in the sense of challenge or continued educational growth every day that they're there, which I did not think was a radical idea until I got my PhD. And then I saw that people didn't really think of it that way. And so that's kind of what motivated me to write this article.
Well, it's interesting because, right, when you talk about the different models of public education, like in theory, the economic model, that's where you're teaching skills, but also I think that the part of the economic model is that you're providing a place for children to be during the day so their parents can work gainfully.
Yes, yes.
But then also the equality of opportunity, right? And I think in a lot of ways, public education has been one of the great levelers, one of the great resources to allow students who start it with humble means, students without resources to get resources in a way that gives them better opportunities, kind of tied into what, at least when I was growing up, was this idea of the economic mobility in the United States. But maybe it's tipped a little too much because we have these trends where different states are declaring that they're getting rid of honors math classes and tracks like that. And some of us, some of us can reflect back to the days when we didn't feel challenged in school.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of mischief a student that does not feel challenged in school might get up to. And that's like a small point out of many larger ones connected to your point.
What's funny, I remember, because I was an education major, so much emphasis on like cooperative learning, different levels of kids, serving different groups, even like gifted and talented, right?
Yeah.
I feel like today, so much of the conversation is really about the struggling student. Like they were trying to meet the lowest level student. And so I think it's interesting because I don't feel like we talk about gifted and talented. We don't talk about the advanced student. And maybe that's because there's a presumption that those students are going to be fine, right? But I think getting back to say, what is the purpose of public education you know, is there an obligation in public education to support these students who are not at the bottom, who these students are at the top? Why are we grappling with this conversation of like, what do we do for these advanced students?
Yeah, I think you're asking really good questions, and you're hitting on something that I wish I had developed a little bit more in this piece. So I think this kind of like equal opportunity, social justice, call it whatever you want. That's part of the story for sure. When you see a school district that removes its gifted and talented program because they think that too many kids from upper class backgrounds are in gifted and talented, and they're going to kind of remove that inequity by just killing the program. That's definitely something that's happening. But it's not just a social justice thing. So if you go back to 2002, No Child Left Behind, it created this accountability standard under George W. Bush. I don't think anyone thinks of him as like a social justice warrior or anything. Built on Texas's accountability system, where they set a set of standards that you had to meet proficiency to get there. If you didn't get kids up to proficient, there would be some kind of consequence in place for teachers and schools. That system is an accountability system that conservatives liked. And it put all of the impetus on getting kids who are below a benchmark to get above that benchmark. And for a kid in that classroom who was already above proficient, there was nothing in that accountability system for that kid. So there is a long-standing kind of structural thing happening in public schools where if you are above proficient, the school doesn't organize itself around you. The standards aren't meant for you. If you're above the state standard in first grade, because you can do multiplication in first grade, there's nothing there for you. There's no accountability pressure back when we had accountability pressure, which we don't really have now. So I do think like Noah Smith had this Substack article he wrote this week about, pre-distribution. It was a social justice critique of what's happening in education reform. And it predates this. It's not a social justice thing. It is a long-standing structural issue with schools where if you're an advanced kid, it just wasn't built for you. And that is odd to me. And I don't know how to trace it exactly to a source. All I can show you is that it predates some of the things that we're seeing now.
So basically, what gets measured gets managed. And once a student lands on the other side of whatever the benchmark is, they are of a lower priority to administration because administration has to raise up the students on the wrong side of the line.
Right, because the accountability only lies on one side of the line,
Right.
right? Which is what we're saying.
Yes, but it doesn't have to be that way. You could build an accountability system that targets growth. So if you come into first grade reading on a third grade level, I'm going to be evaluated based on my ability to get you to be reading on a fourth grade level.
Right.
And so if I targeted growth as the metric for which I was going to be held accountable, you would get a very different set of things, but that's just never how it's been structured. But it doesn't mean that it's incompatible with an accountability system. It's just that the accountability system we chose, even in a conservative era, is based on getting kids up to a certain level and then not doing much for them beyond that.
So what would we say, like, what's the harm then when this enrichment is being withheld from these advanced or thriving students? What kind of impact does that have then?
When I was writing this article, I really tried to find some research on what is the harm of being bored in school. And I couldn't really find anything. You see some
Because
stuff
nobody's
like, you see
evaluating these
Nobody's
students.
researching it. That's not where the money is.
No one looks at it. Exactly. But I'll just tell you one example. So I have a friend who's at a school district. I won't say the school district, where they are implementing this kind of science-based reform, which is kind of a scripted style of instruction. So the teachers are kind of following a script. So the kids don't have a lot of discretion about their learning day. They go through phonics, they go through this kind of prompted math. And this has actually been shown to really help struggling learners. So my friend, whose kid is not a struggling learner, she already kind of didn't think that there would be a lot for her kid in the math and reading classes because the kid's already reading, the kid's already able to do that kind of math stuff. And so what she said is she's like, well, what I really hope for my kid is they would get something else out of it. They would like be inspired by a story when they read Pippi Longstocking or something. They would just kind of get this like incidental learning, like a love of learning. And so this scripted math program is even killing that. Like it's making it so that even the school day itself is just not fun. But my own view, which again doesn't have like a strong research base because I haven't been able to find it, is that when you rob a kid of their love of learning by making them so that they're just not challenged and enriched, you're kind of affecting them in this way that we're not fully accounting for.
Right.
So that's kind of like the moral argument that I think. There's other stuff that you could add in there, like it's bad to not educate smart kids because then they're not going to be as productive or go to be as successful. But to me, it's this kind of like the kids' welfare that I'm focused on.
It's sort of like I think what you're talking about is sparking intellectual curiosity, that sometimes the way in which the rigidity of either the curriculum or where the expectations are for students, if you don't get that intellectual curiosity, like to pursue things, you just kind of end up with kids that just, they don't engage, they don't pursue, they don't, want to, and which is one of the things we're seeing actually in college, going towards college admissions, which is the space Mike and I find is trying to get the kids to find their authentic self and their intellectual curiosity is part of what colleges often recognize in their applicants. So if you don't spark that, that changes where they're going to end up maybe because they don't
if you
show
set
up
the
that
bar
way.
too low in your classroom, they're not ready for that next level when they think they are. We see constantly students who are earning all A's in up through high school, and then they're not even reaching college readiness benchmarks, and they're completely unaware of this because they've aced every
parents
test
are, at
that's been
least.
put in front of them up to that point and not encouraged to go further.
Yeah, and I think this is great inflation and not challenging flourishing kids. They're not quite the same thing, but they sort of are in the same kind of ballpark of concepts.
So I don't want to be cynical, but when I think about, as a parent, my own kids in school and teachers saying, your son, your daughter is doing great, right? And I'm thinking, wow, there must not be any more I can do because they're doing great. But at the same time, if somebody was saying, well, no, they're above benchmark, and now I realize, well, how do I make them even better? it does start to mean that the teacher has some accountability or some responsibility for figuring out how does my kid move up there. So I think sometimes lately parents are almost under this impression that everything's good. But then, like as Mike was suggesting, we get to a certain level of like college admissions and we realize in the greater picture, no, our kids are not quote unquote great. But I do understand that for educators, there's just this increased burden, more and more and more. What can you do? So I think the dilemma is just for teachers who struggle to meet whatever, it's like all of a sudden we're trying to get them to meet more and more standards. And I know that's can't be easy.
That's a great point. I definitely think that teachers would struggle with a new set of accountability obligations that had required them to think about the full spectrum of student growth. And if you combine low standards, it makes it a lot easier to meet them, right? That's exactly what you're getting at.
That's the thing. If I could speak to something pragmatic, right? A harm. We're talking about the harm for the students, but I can speak to potential harm to the institution by not challenging advanced students. I have it on good authority that students that don't feel challenged in the classroom can become disruptive influences. And and that I think likely occurs in classroom after classroom, school after school, district after district. This is a practical concern because all educators complain about the classroom management challenges of their job. And it's a good way to get ahead of some of the most predictable problems in your classroom. If that a student is not being challenged, if they don't feel like they're learning anything, it's rare that they're going to sit there quietly. If you're forcing a student, I think, Kenneth, you made this point, like we're forcing students to be there. It's not
Yes,
elective. They
this is a
have to be
compulsory
there.
schooling,
And
exactly.
if they have to be there and you're forcing them to be there and you fail to engage them, the repercussions are on you.
Yes, and the other thing that you're seeing is families are exiting public schools. So people, I think what happened during COVID is people saw that, oh, this is what it's like for my kid in school. A lot of times they're not getting a lot out of it. I'm going to look elsewhere. I'm going to look into homeschooling. I'm going to look into private schooling options. And so,
And when that money leaves the public school systems become weakened.
yeah, and you lose some of the best kids that are helping other kids.
Absolutely.
It's a bad thing all around.
Yeah, and that's another thing,
Yeah.
right? Is like setting the pace for the other students to look to their classmates and say,
Yes.
this is the person that I want to emulate academically.
Yeah. I don't think it's good for public schools to have the best and brightest kids looking elsewhere for educational enrichment. But I just want to go back to this idea, like the way schools are built now is we think of a kid who is talented as a kind of like a resource that can be taxed. Like, okay, you have excess amounts of achievement, so I don't have to give you anything. I'm going to give now my time to this other kid who has less amounts of achievement. But your aptitude is not just like your income. It is a core feature of who you are as a person. Your understanding of the world, your curiosity, your taste in music and things, kids that are developing these things early on, to treat those things as something that isn't owed anything because you're ahead of somebody else is really like not respecting that kid as a person. So that like this is like the moral problem that I have with how we treat these kids. The practical problems, I totally agree with you. But I think there is really something deeper about how we treat kids as learners and people who are developing and not valuing that. And that's what really bothers me.
Yeah.
So here's a question. If families obviously are recognizing that their students have that they're more advanced, right? That they're demonstrating all these things that are, making them kind of the thriving students, if you will. Why shouldn't families then be responsible for
Yeah,
providing enrichment to their own children, right? Like they're the first line of defense. They're the first person that should be able to recognize that, right?
100%. I wrote a version of this paper back in 2015 when I defended my dissertation, so a long time ago. And there were PhD faculty on my PhD dissertation committee who said exactly that. They were, no, the public school doesn't have an obligation because if you're a privileged family, the family can do it. And that frees up the school to kind of educate the kids who need it the most. So that's, first of all, I think it's just wrong because there are lots of kids who are not from privileged backgrounds who are still far above the
Hmm.
average.
Yeah, that presumption that the advanced students are always students of means is
False.
is false.
Exactly.
And it's patently false. And we know that we're always looking for the halo students, high achieving, low
Yeah, low
opportunity,
income. Yeah.
right? Is that
Yeah. Yes.
yeah, so we know that they exist, and that's part of the
Yeah.
mission of public education is to support them too. And you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you're if you're just putting it all on external enrichment.
Yes. So I totally agree with you there. But the other part of this is the thing that you just said a second ago, which is that education is compulsory. We think public school in particular has a social value, democratizing value. So I'm going to put my kid in there who's above proficient because I work with him on a daily basis to make sure he's doing well. And once he gets in that school door, what do you do with him? You put him in a closet for the day. Or if you don't want to put him in a closet, you sit him down with another kid who's below him and you say, hey, you're going to act as my co-teacher for the day and kind of be a peer mentor for that kid. Or what is actually happening in my first grade kids classroom is he and two other kids, they get put in a separate table to work on math problems by themselves.
Right.
So he's not getting instructed, but he can, he's getting at least something different. Like you're in there. And if you value the time of a kid in the way that we value our own time, you would want them to be enriched. And so I think, yes, the families can do stuff, but the kid is there. And if we're not valuing their time, what are they going to think about these institutions that they're being compelled to go to? So I think,
Yeah, we know what they think about
yes,
it. They come out, they say school
they
is
hate it.
is like prison. It doesn't do
Yes,
anything for
boring.
me.
So yeah, I do think that. And the other part of this is also like if you just talk to like Ed Choice does these polls, and 90% of the American population thinks kids should be having access to advanced coursework. So I don't think this is really like this. And again, I want to go back to what I said earlier. It's not just a social justice equity thing. Like the structure of schools is misaligned with how the vast majority of Americans think schools should be structured. And it's not because woke equities, it predates all of that stuff, but there is this misalignment. And I think people who look at parents who put a lot of time in their kids, nobody thinks that kid should still be neglected in school. Nobody thinks that. Or, 5% of the population thinks.
Right, Kenneth, say an administrator from a school district is listening to this conversation and they are persuaded by
Yeah.
the case for providing some kind of
Miraculously
resources.
persuaded.
Are there any basic changes that can be implemented quickly that can begin to rectify the problems?
Yeah, so this I think is really the $1 million question. You use the word quickly, and I would say probably not
You're
quickly.
right.
I'll
I'm looking for quick,
just
cheap fixes here.
yeah, cheap and stuff. I'll just give you a little bit of just personal experience. So, my wife and I have kind of been shopping around private schools in our area, mostly as a curiosity to kind of see what they do. So we've gone to like some really, posh $45,000 a year private schools just to see. And we talked to them and we've asked them these exact questions that you're asking us. Like, my kid can do math on a third grade level. He's in first grade. What are we going to do? And I have been so surprised to hear them say the exact same stuff that I hear from my public school teacher, which is, oh, well, if he finishes the assignment really quickly, we'll give him some word problems that we go deep.
Right.
I'm like, oh, I know what a word problem is. It's just something that takes a long time for a first grader to do, so you don't have to pay attention to them for those 10 minutes.
It'll get them all like kind of engaged like in the problem, but
engaged,
not distracting from everything else going on in the classroom.
Totally. And so then we asked the follow-up, like, well, what about pacing? Can you get him, to do the stuff that's in second and third grade? And they said, no, we don't manipulate pacing. So these are the most expensive schools I could find.
Right.
They don't change pacing. So that speaks again to this like structure. There's a challenge here because they don't perceive it as essential. So the example that I brought up in this article as one possible mechanism is this Ellis Elementary School, which they basically reoriented how they did this for literacy. They didn't do it for math, but you could do it for math. But they basically like aligned the schedule from K to 5. They said, okay, we're going to do reading every day at the same time. And if you do if you're a third grade reader in the first grade, we'll just have you go read the third grade content for that day. So for that 1 hour, you just switch classrooms and you read on grade level for an hour. Then you go back for socialization and other stuff to your kindergarten classroom again. You could do that for math and reading. You said quick. I don't think it would be quick, but it's not that hard.
Right.
You just have to understand that this is important. You scaffold the day so the schedules are aligned. And then a kid who's doing fifth grade math in first grade can just hop in the fifth grade class. And now they're doing fractions and getting into this kind of advanced pre-algebraic reasoning. They can do that. And they can do it every single day that they do math. That's not a crazy thing.
That's not a crazy
Although I
thing.
guess in some buildings, I'm thinking about my own school district, right? When you're just a building that's K through 2 or you're 3 through 5,
Sure, yes.
there's some limitations. But I do agree with you. That makes so much sense because we've done that before by grade level of differentiating like different groups, the high group, the medium group, the lower group of reading. But to me, that feels like that would be such a way to solve it. Like that you could then, you don't look at kids by their age, you look at them by where are they academically, and then where do you place them? Although actually, I came from the old school of where you don't do that. Like cooperative learning was the thing back when I went to school. So you mix the groups up, like you're saying. So it's very interesting how educational philosophy and what we think works for kids, how it's changed over the years, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that what I'm proposing is the majority opinion on how school should be reformed, but I think that there is a fundamental normative thing happening about what is it about school that you think, this is the first question you asked. If you think it's about getting kids up to levels, then you can do what we've been doing now. If you think it's about every kid having an opportunity to grow and develop their own interest and potential, you would need to do something very different. Now, that very different thing is not going to cost a lot more, and it doesn't mean we have to break down schools. It's, even just like a reorganization of where kids go and learn math and reading in the day. That's it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, I guess we're not going to solve the whole problem today.
No.
We could talk about this all day with you, Kenneth. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, appreciate it.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can email me at my university email account. It's kshores, SHORES, @udel.edu.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Tests and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.